Hi there and welcome to Ticker Climate. My name is Holly Stearns. It's great to have you tuning in every single week. Now on Ticker Climate, we tackle the climate crisis that is facing our planet and we examine what actions governments and as well as corporations need to be taking. Each week we speak with key people in this space. Now my co-host Scott Hamilton is a climate change and energy expert. Scott is an author, researcher and policy advisor with a mission to tackle the big issues and accelerate climate change action. Scott, always a pleasure to see you.
Hello, Holly. How are you today?
Really good. It's great to see you as always in lockdown, but we're getting there. Now let's get right into it. This week, our guest is Australian Green Senator Sarah Hanson, who is a fighter for strong climate action on the front line in Australian climate wars. Sarah, always a pleasure to see you.
Thanks for having me. And yes, what a mess we're all in around the whole country right now with lockdowns being extended and curfews being put in place, but this technology allows us to carry on, so it's lovely to be here.
Indeed. I wanted to start our conversation with the horrific IPCC report last week. Now, we have fires all over the world, including the third biggest fire ever recorded at 15,000 square kilometres in Siberia. Now, smoke from the blaze has actually reached as far as the North Pole. Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison says that Australia is only contributing a little amount compared to China when it comes to emissions. Now, you've previously said clearly that the Australian government is not doing enough in this sector, but what exactly should we be doing, and I guess what is the cost of that, Sarah?
Well, thanks, Holly. And look, it is just horrifying looking around the world right now, and we've got places on fire like never seen before. We had mass flooding and deathly flooding in places like Germany. And of course, none of this is news to Australians because we lived through this not so long ago, only 2 summers, and we had those horrible climate fires that just wreaked havoc across the eastern seaboard. And of course, not just in those regional areas where the bushfires were, but they got very close to suburban areas, very close to towns. And of course, our major cities were engulfed in smoke. People were wearing masks in Sydney long before the pandemic because of the bushfire smoke, creating such a hazardous situation there. And this, sadly, is what the IPCC report that was handed down last week says is going to become more frequent and more devastating. These types of weather events, these extreme weather events, unless we really act now to take those deep cuts to carbon pollution within the next decade. And rather than talking about what our goals are for 2050, we've got to be talking about what our goals are for 2030, 2035. And Australia is missing in action. We haven't put anything forward even for 2050 at this point. And yet US, Canada, other countries right around the world are talking about strong ambition for 2030 and 2035. It's hard to see how Australian run gas recovery from the pandemic is going to help us deal with this climate crisis.
Certainly right there, Sarah. Now, there's also been some interesting moves that the federal government's been doing in the past couple of weeks, trying to change the remit of ARENA, there's solar tax being mentioned, and what people have called the Coal Keeper program. Could you walk us through a bit of what's been going on in Parliament in the last little while?
Yes, well, the government is trying to change the rules so that the Clean Energy Agency, ARENA, that was part of the one of the agencies that was put together to try and fund and support acceleration towards clean, green responses to climate change and renewable energy. The government wants to keep taking money either out of that agency, they've taken a lot of money out already, or change the rules so it can be spent on not such clean and green technologies and energy production, whether it's changes to ARENA or the Clean Energy Finance Corporation. The government is really making fundamental changes that will change the ability for those agencies to focus and prioritise renewable energy over things like gas and kind of expanding different types of carbon capture and storage for coal. The other thing they're doing is spending tens of billions of dollars subsidising the opening up of gas fields in the Beetaloo Basin in the Northern Territory. And this flies directly in the face of what the IPCC report says, what the UN Secretary General is saying very clearly to countries, and also what other countries like the US and the UK, Boris Johnson and John Biden are saying, that we've got to get serious about reducing carbon pollution. And that means we can't keep opening up more oil, gas and coal facilities. So there's no point spending billions and millions of dollars of taxpayers' money expanding coal, oil and gas production here in Australia. And that Beetaloo Basin money that's being spent so far, $21 million of taxpayers' money has been handed to one single company, Empire Energy. They don't pay any tax in Australia, by the way. I questioned them at a Senate hearing not that long ago, and they haven't paid any tax. They've got their hand out for massive amounts of taxpayer subsidies, and it's all going to go towards making it harder and harder for us to get climate change arrested and back on track.
Yeah, Sarah, just continuing on this subject, I mean, the Smart Energy Council today called on the state and territory energy ministers to reject the federal government pro-coal, anti-solar agenda when they meet Minister Angus Taylor on Friday. What would you like the energy ministers to essentially come up with, I guess?
Well, we've got to come up with a plan that will reduce our carbon pollution in the next decade, and that means we have to start electrifying everything. And that means we have to start producing that energy from sources that are renewable and that are clean. Solar, of course, we have abundance here in Australia. We're the sunniest continent on Earth, and we need to be capturing it, storing it, and being able to distribute it in a much smarter and faster fashion. Wind, of course, as well. So the technologies are available. And this is what really gets me about the conversation of coming out of the government, is that they are talking out both sides of their mouth. On one hand, they're saying, oh, well, we don't really need to do anything. It's the rest of the world's problem. We're doing enough. And on the other hand, they're saying, oh, we're going to do all this, but it's all going to be, we're waiting for the technology. Well, the technology is here. We need to back these industries. We need to back this business and start making sure that they have certainty into the future. Renewable energy is here. It needs to be supported, and the government needs to stop making it harder for renewable energy agencies and companies to get on and produce the energy that Australians want. Now, we have amazing popularity and support for solar power in Australia, and it is just mind-boggling that the Morrison government is so ideological about this that they just can't see that this is an advantage that Australia has. One of the things that is really going to disadvantage Australia is the rest of the world and big, countries or collections of countries like the EU, the UK, Canada, the UK, and the US. They start putting in place almost border adjustments for our products, our trade that goes from our country to their country, and they start whacking on kind of amounts, tariffs, because we haven't put in place a price on carbon. We haven't started to be responsible enough for the pollution that we produce. That is really going to start making it difficult for Australian producers. So the coal and the gas industry is out saying we can't do anything. It's all too hard. This is going to cost jobs. Meanwhile, the rest of Australian producers and industries are going to cop it really hard if the government doesn't start playing ball.
Yeah, it's certainly right, Sarah. And I think I heard someone say the other day, it might have been Saul Griffith, say that electrification is the vaccine for climate change, and just how powerful it is to electrify everything.
Yes, and I think I saw that report that was out last week, and it's he's absolutely right. This is what we need to do. The technology is there. We just have to get smart about how we use it. The production of renewables, the storage of renewables, and the smart distribution of renewables. The other element that does need to be worked on in all of this, however, is how we save our biodiversity and how we protect biodiversity, because we need those carbon sinks of our forests and our woodlands and our healthy oceans to make sure we can really reduce the pollution, not just stop creating so much, but to start to soak it up as well.
Yeah, and Sarah, I mean, a very important climate meeting is coming up in November, COP26 in Glasgow. What do you think we're likely to see at that meeting? What's likely to unfold from Australia's perspective, but also more globally as well?
Well, what we're going to see is all the major companies put on the table clear goals for reducing pollution and making deep cuts over the next decade. They're going to put targets on the table for 2030 and 2035. And Australia is still walking around in the wilderness wondering whether we should bother doing anything by 2050. We are already very isolated. Scott Morrison has kind of made Australia a pariah up until now because of his refusal to really come to the table. We were called out by the US diplomats only last week on this, that the Prime Minister and the Australian government are not doing enough, and they're going to have to be prepared better when they get to Glasgow. The Australian government likes to say that there's not much Australia can do. We're not a big contributor. Well, we export. We're the third largest exporter of fossil fuels in the world. What happens to those fossil fuels? They're burnt, they pollute the atmosphere, and it makes climate change worse. We have a significant role to play on the global stage if we're willing to take it.
Yeah, and Scott, I wanted to get your thoughts on this as well. What are your thoughts about Australia trying to point fingers at countries like China and India?
Yeah, Holly, well, it's certainly not okay to piss in the pool just because the other kids are doing it. So Australia's got to make sure that it cleans up its act. And the other thing I'd say is that Australia is perhaps one of the most highest per capita emissions of greenhouse gas emissions in the world. So in terms of each person, we contribute more emissions than China or India or the USA. And both China and India are recently also stepping up in terms of their action. So, and as Sarah was saying before, we need to be careful because we're currently in a bit of a cold war with China, and be nothing they would probably like better than to put tariffs on us under the gauze of a climate tariff. But we really do need to step up our action.
Yeah, and lastly, before we wrap things up, this show always goes so quick. There's so much to cover. Sarah, how do you feel about what the world is going to look like, I guess, for the kids of today?
This is what horrifies me the most, Holly, is that the science is clear and it's becoming more and more obvious. All we need to do is look around and see the extreme weather, the more frequent that's becoming, those horrible bushfires that we experienced, those climate fires in summer in 2019-20. I've got a 14-year-old daughter, and she is watching very carefully what decisions governments are making, what, as adults, the decisions that we make. It's not just that we have to save the planet now for the next generation. It is the generations here right now, young people here right now, who are going to be living with the consequences.
Absolutely. That's all we do have time for today on Ticker Climate. I want to thank you both, Scott and Sarah, for your time, and we'll speak with you both soon.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Holly. Bye-bye.